Alright guys, so how do I make a beat? So there's a couple things I look at when making a beat, and one of them is trig conditions. Now the trig conditions, to me, I use them so they make the beat not sound so static and a little bit more dynamic, in the sense that the hits aren't always on the same step each time. So that to me is the beauty of trig conditions. Secondly, I look at something like scenes or the quick performance knob or the performance pads. You know, those things, to me, those are what make the beat sound different in terms of tone. So let's get started. So I usually tend to start with my kick and snare. So I have a kit here that I made. This is an analog kit, meaning that I take advantage of the analog engine and not of the samples. So if you look in the sample menu here, none of my hits, except for that one, which I'll get to in a little bit, none of my drum hits have any sample on them. They have a sample listed up top here, but the level is down for all of them. So all the sounds are coming from the analog engine. Start with the kick and snare. Now another thing I consider here is I like to have more of a human feel with my beats, and the way I personally achieve that is by recording in live recording mode, which is achieved by holding record and pressing play. So the reason I do that, I see an advantage in terms of doing it live, because if I was to do it by plugging in each trig here, then personally to me the only way to get a human feel is to hold the trig down like this, for example, and then adjust the micro timing. Because basically if everything is on the grid, to me that's the opposite of human feel. That's more of a robotic feel. There's absolutely nothing wrong with either of those, but I just want to let you know my thought process when I'm making beats. I prefer the human feel, but you know, if I was to do like some EDM or something like that, that stuff kind of benefits from having more of an on-grid beat, at least in terms of the kick and, you know, the snare or the clap or whatever it may be, and then the hi-hats. But you know, there's still ways to spice up an EDM beat. Like you could do a beat on the grid here, and then for example you could sample a shaker into the rhythm here. Those are just kind of things to think about. You know, I'm not telling you that you have to do it one way or the other. I just want you guys to be aware of the different possibilities and the different options you have when dealing with creating a beat on the rhythm, or just in general. I mean, most of that stuff I talked about just now is, you know, general stuff that can be applied to any machine. The way for me to utilize live recording is to actually use a metronome. Why, you ask? Because it kind of makes it easier to get it to loop properly on the rhythm. Because if you kind of just like, you know, on the rhythm, that's one thing you can't do, is just kind of record basically like a sample or record just like whatever you play on here. It all has to fit within the confines of the Elektron sequencer, which is not a bad thing, trust me. But that just makes it so you have to record your live recording beats using the metronome. So you would achieve that by hitting function and metronome here. You hit yes for it to be active. My time signature is just going to be a 4/4. I like to have the pre-roll set to 1 bar, so that way once I hit record I have time to get over here and get ready, you know, basically count myself in to start making the beat. And then the volume of the metronome, I just kind of leave it at default, but if you find that it's too quiet, you know, certainly turn that up. So anyway, also my tempo is going to be let's see, I'll turn it down a little bit. Now I'm going to do this off screen because I have my Octatrack sending the MIDI information for the tempo. That's a discussion for another video. But I'm just going to leave it at, well, let's go a little further. Let's go down to something easy, 85, something chill. You know, that's more of like a hip-hop tempo. Doesn't have to be hip-hop, but it's just more of like a chill, slower tempo. Whereas like 130, 133, 155, that's more of like a techno type beat, you know, EDM type beat. So you're going to hear the metronome count in, and then I'll start recording. Okay, now you might be saying to yourself, oh, that's too simple or whatever, but you know, that's a good place to start. Also, one thing I want to mention and make very clear is that you need to consider your scale length over here and how many bars you want your beat to be. Let's press function and page. So right now, of course, by default, it's at 16 steps. 16 steps. So there's a couple different ways to look at this. So if you have your pattern, your scale mode set to normal mode, then whatever you set this to will make it so every track is the exact same length. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's just something you want to keep in mind. Personally, I like to go to advanced mode, so that way each track can be a different length. Now there's, you know, some interesting things you can do with that. Like for example, one track, like the hi-hat or something, for example, could be in like a triple feel. So it could be like a 3/4 hi-hat, whereas your, you know, kick and snare could be in a 4/4 feel. So that essentially means that it's like a polyrhythm. But we won't mess with that today, but that's something I can make another video about if you guys are interested. Polyrhythmic beats on the rhythm. But so I have a trick. If you leave it at 16 here and then you go over to this and change it that way, then you'll notice the master length stays at 16. So what does that mean? If this track is at 64, but the master length is only at 16, that means that this track and every other track will only have a maximum length of 16, regardless of what the actual track is set to. The way that I get around that is I actually go to normal mode, and then I get it to 64 by pressing that, which is essentially the equivalent of 4 bars. Each of these would be a bar. And then I go to advanced mode, and then I change this back down to 16, for example, if that's what I want, or if I want 32. But you'll notice that the master length is set at 64. Because the alternative is you have to go over here and change it this way, which is kind of annoying. But you know, it's not a shortcoming. It's just that's just how you have to deal with it. Also, another thing to keep in mind, you know, there's a lot to this, of course, but another thing to keep in mind is I recorded a pattern in 16 steps in one page. So if you change this to 32, or technically, let's backtrack a little bit. I changed it from 16 to 64. What that does is it copies the whole thing 4 times, because we only originally had 1 bar, but when we changed it to 4 bars, it takes that and copies it on each bar, which, trust me, it's a good thing to have. There are some machines that don't have that feature, where if you record 1 bar and then you change the pattern length, it doesn't copy them over on some other machines. But trust me, that's something that you probably want. I get if you find that to be kind of annoying, but you know, there's ways around that, of course. But anyway, so keep in mind that now that we're at 64, the beat was copied over each page. So if we play it, now it's on the second page, now it's on the third page, now it's on the fourth page. One thing you may have noticed, as soon as I press play, where was that bass drum that I recorded in there? Let's take a look at it. So if we go to the first page and hold down this trig, you'll see, and then press left or right, you see the micro timing here. So what you'll notice is that because I recorded it live, I didn't record it exactly on the metronome, which, yes, that's technically what I wanted. But in this case, one of the things about the rhythm is that if you record the trig before it gets to the 1 right there, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, then technically it won't play it because the trig, even though it's on the 1 right here, technically the timing of it is before the pattern actually starts. So you'll notice if you play it, see, it missed that one, and then you go to the next page and it plays that one. So hopefully, if you're wondering like, oh, why doesn't it play the trig that I recorded in there, it's because you need to adjust the micro timing. All you have to do is just move it right on the 1 or move it just a little bit ahead of the 1. So I'll just take that and just move it like 1 or 2 micro steps, you know, ahead of the 1. And then if we look at this one, let's see where that's at. See, that one was about the same timing as the other one, so it's a little behind the beat. So just as an aside, for beats and for drums in general, coming from a drummer, the human feel comes from when the beats are not exactly always on the 1. They're either a little bit behind or a little bit ahead of the beat. That's what makes so many amazing beats sound the way they do. The most obvious example to me is something like James Brown, you know, any of those soul drummers from back in the day. They have their own feel because they're not exactly right on the beat. And that's why their beats sound so cool. Like I said, neither one is good or bad, you know, having it robotic or more human-like, but you just need to decide which one it is that you want. If you just want everything on the grid, that's okay. But if you find yourself thinking, you know, these beats kind of sound a little robotic, then this is how you achieve that. You change the micro timing. So, okay, moving on. I recorded the bass and the snare, the kick and the snare, with live recording mode. So let's try recording the hi-hats just by putting the trigs manually here. So let's make sure we have the scale that we want. Go back to advanced mode. So the hi-hat one, I'm just going to leave that at 16. And I'll show you what I'm going to do here, an interesting thing that you can do. A cool trick is just go ahead and lay a hi-hat on every single trig there. So if we play that, also, by the way, we can take the metronome off. So that way, it's just the beat playing. Also, another thing I'll show you guys real quick. If you don't like the feel of how you laid down your kick drum and snare drum, personally I recommend just re-recording it, you know, re-recording it in live recording mode here, because every time you record it, you know, if you're not, I mean, you know, technically it'll be different every time unless you're purposely trying to make it on the metronome each time. You know, that's just, you know, we're all human, that doesn't always happen. So an interesting way to deal with that is either record it again, like I mentioned, or you can use the quantize function. Now, the interesting thing about the quantize function, you know, like on the MPC, for example, they have it so you don't have to either just be completely quantized or not quantized. You can kind of blend it in between. So to me, the more you turn up this knob for track 1, the closer it moves each hit towards the 1, so everything's on the grid. I like to set it, you know, if I want to just tighten it up and I don't really want to record it again, then I'll just set it to about 56. That always seems, you know, between 50 and 60, that always seems to be a good place for me to start. And then I just check it to see how I like the feel. But also, real quick, before I check it, I'm only doing that to track 1. So I want to do it to track 2 as well, because that's where the snare is. So I'm going to set both of them to about 50. So now I press play to check how it sounds now, because ultimately that's the most important thing. Doesn't matter if you quantize, doesn't matter if you put trigs manually like that, you know, like all that matters is what your beat sounds like to you, essentially, not even to other people. If you like how the beat sounds, it doesn't matter how you achieve that. So this is just, you know, the way I look at it, my thought process with making beats. So let's hear what it sounds like after I quantized these two tracks just a little bit. Okay, personally I like that. I like that when it wasn't quantized, it was a little, essentially it wasn't quite matching up with the hi-hat that I laid down manually, which is all completely on the grid. So that was what I was thinking. I wanted the bass drum and the snare drum to kind of blend a little bit better with that, because normally I would record the hi-hat like this. But you know, for demonstration's sake, I wanted to show you how to lay down the trigs manually. So yes, I like how these two are quantized. This one is not quantized because it's already on the grid. So what I'm going to do here is actually take some of these and change the micro timing a little bit to kind of make it more human. So something you can do is, let's just say I'm going to mess with the upbeat ones, the ones on the offbeat. So to me that would be 2, 4, 6, and 8. You can do these all at the same time too, by the way. Well, so I'll do it this way. I'll do 2 and 6 together, move that a little behind the beat. 4 and 8, move that a little ahead. 10 and 14, move that back 1. 12 and 16, move it back even more. So let's see how that sounds. So if you notice, that's a completely different feel on the hi-hat than I had it before. So personally, I don't know if I like that one as much. So, you know, what you can do is either use the quantize to just move them all back. You could just set it all the way up, and that'll essentially move it back to where they were. So you can tell already just by the feel of the hi-hat. So that's what I'll do for now. Another way to do that is to just take them all off and put them all back on. And that essentially puts them all back where they were. So these are just little tricks I'm trying to show you along the way. So to keep this, in the interest of keeping this video a little shorter, let's just move on. So now we have a basic beat here. So what I want to do is add a scene that actually changes the the beat using a filter, changes the sound of it. So I'm pretty sure I already have some scenes down here, so I'm not going to mess with those. So I'm going to just go up here to scene 9. So you select it that way. And if you're curious more about scenes, be sure to check out my scene video on how to make scenes on the Rytm. So I'm going to go through this a little quicker than normal. So function 9 to edit the scene. I have 0 locks on there right now. I'm going to select the tracks that I want to be filtered. So I'm going to start with the bass drum, track 1, and I'm going to hold the scene down to edit it, and then go over here to the filter. And the best way to adjust your scenes in real time is to play the beat and listen to it. Okay, I like how that bass drum sounds. I'm going to do the snare drum now. Okay, I like the snare. I'm going to do the hi-hats. Okay, now, so when we press this scene, press function and, or press no here, go back to the scene. So right now you can see that there is indeed a scene in this slot because it's the dimmed blue, but if you press it, it gets even lighter, and that means that you're currently using that scene. So this could be used as like an intro or you know, in between sections or something like that. Now I have a beat that is completely filtered when I press this scene. Okay, and then the final thing I'll talk about is going back to what I mentioned before, the trig conditions. So if you don't want the beat to sound the same, then you need to add some trig conditions. So what I'm going to do is I'll just go through this as quick as I can just to add them in there so you can hear what they sound like. So I'm going to add a bass drum right here. You know, I'm not going to explain why I put the beats that I do in what place. That's more just kind of up to you, like where you want your beats to be. So you go over to Trig, TRC, that's trig conditions. You have to hold this down. So I want this to trig maybe 50% of the time. Well, let's see what it sounds like 100%. Okay, so I'm going to do that 50% of the time. Now I'm going to go to the next page of the kick drum track. I'm going to do one on this step right here, and I'm going to do that one at also 50% of the time. So let's listen to that. Okay, then I'm going to add one over here. Let's do that one 50% of the time. You heard one of them just play right there. Then I'm going to add some more over here and do them 33% of the time. Well, for demonstration's sake, I'm going to show you something. So say you want these to trig, you know, say 33% of the time or so, but you want them to make sure that they trig together. So hold them both down, and then we're going to utilize the however you want to look at it, the ratio trigs here. And if you're curious about trig conditions, also go back and check out my trig condition videos. So what I want is for them to trig on the second repetition every 2 times this whole pattern plays. So let's press play and hear what that sounds like. So the whole pattern for the bass drum is 4 pages long. So it's going to trig on the second time around. So let's listen. Okay, you notice they didn't trig that time. So now that it started over, they're going to trig. 3rd page, now 4th page. Okay, I really like how that one sounds with the snare drum. And then also, the snare drum, let's add some trig conditions. So I'm going to go ahead and do that like 25% of the time. And to me, this is kind of like a leading snare in the sense that it leads into the bass drum that's about to play on trig 1. So what I'm going to do is turn the velocity down on this one, maybe to 30 or 40. I'm going to put one right here as well. See, to me, the cool thing about adding trig conditions is if you just listen to the beat over and over, you'll start to kind of hear things that you want to be in there. And as we were listening to that, I was like, okay, on the 3rd page, it would be cool to have another snare right here. And I'm going to actually set that to like 75%. And also, another drummer trick, I mean, when you're not dealing with the main snares in terms of like the backbeat, it's good practice to turn these down in terms of the velocity. So I'll turn that one down because it's kind of like a snare. It's like a ghost note, if you're familiar with that. So that's why I do that. And then I'm also going to add one here. Let's hear what that sounds like. So the velocity made it sound weird. So, and then also I'm going to change the micro timing a little bit. All right. So now I think we have a good, solid, basic beat, a good you know, a good backbone for adding some synth or something in there. So we have our scene as well. You might notice that when you're listening to the beat repeat, you might notice that some of them don't quite, some of the trigs may not sound the right timing to you. Now, all you would have to do is go back and kind of, you know, tweak. This one, I believe, is the one that didn't sound that good to me, so I'm going to have to go back and tweak that. But in an interest to keep this video a little shorter, I'm definitely going to end it there. And I will do a couple more videos about this just because there are so many different things to talk about and to consider on the rhythm when making a beat. So hope that helps you guys. Leave any questions down below if you have anything, and I will see you in the next video.